start off by telling you about some of my own experiences, starting as an undergraduate. So since the summer after my freshman year of college, I've woven my way through various energies and collision systems, all in nuclear and particle physics, as it's worked out. So my first research job was working in a low-energy nuclear structure lab, called Right Nuclear Structure Lab, which was at Yale. This is a position I got through my undergraduate university. I was doing, I guess use the mic. All right, okay. Is this better? There we go. So my first ever research job was working in a low-energy nuclear structure lab. I got this position through a faculty member at my college. I was working with 100 MeV, mega electron volt beams targets. This was pretty neat. It was actually, I still hold this as a model research experience that I try to create for my undergrads now that I'm on the other side. So it was a really nicely balanced experience I had, where I had a research project. I had some kind of rote hardware work that would have been boring if I had to do it alone, or I'd had to do it for more weeks than I did. So I got to climb around inside the belly of this tandem Van de Graaff accelerator, and I had this little 5,000 volt adapter, and I had to go through like 1,500 resistors that we had to measure in teams or whatever, and so we'd really just put it up and then say, okay, 1.3 megohms, and the other guy you were working with would write it down, and you go to the next one. So it wasn't intellectually interesting work, but it was just a small part of my experience, and it was in conjunction with this research project, working with some real data. And then the last month of the summer, my research advisor had all the young people working in the group give presentations to each other on what they've been working on. So it was a really nicely balanced experience, and I'm grateful to have had that so early on. He was my research advisor that summer. He'd actually moved from a most of his career he'd spent at Brookhaven National Laboratory on Long Island, suburban New York, and he recommended that I apply for a summer, basically it was a summer REU position, research experience for undergrad. So I did that at his recommendation, and also had a pretty good experience there. I've moved up 3 orders of magnitude from mega electron volt to giga electron volt. Then I went into traditional particle physics, and again, it was directly linked to the research advisor I was working with at Brookhaven National Lab. He had dual German and Indian citizenship. Through his German citizenship, he'd actually done a summer student's undergraduate program at CERN, the International Particle Physics Laboratory in Geneva, Switzerland. And I got very lucky, as it happened. It was the very first year that Americans were allowed to apply to the program. It was actually a program through the University of Michigan, as it happened, coincidentally. And I was one of the 10 students who got selected, and it was a really, really neat experience. So I was doing detector development and electronics development, looking toward the future. This is in the late 90s here, so it was still a long ways away, but what was going to be the Large Hadron Collider, going up again a couple orders of magnitude in energy. Then I ended up with a boyfriend from Italy after spending the summer. And so what actually, my main motivation when I was looking for a senior project, I had a senior project required for my major at my undergrad institution, and I was looking for something that might take me back to Europe. And so I actually found a group that was working at DAISY, the Deutsches Elektron Synchrotron. So it's a national laboratory in Germany, in Hamburg, Germany. And of course, I had to take classes and stuff, but I was doing simulation studies for a proposed polarized proton-electron collider. They had a running proton-electron collider without polarization. So I spent my senior project doing this, and I did get to go to Europe. I got to give a workshop talk on my senior thesis work in May, right before I graduated. So, but I didn't get to see my boyfriend because he wasn't able to come up from Italy at the time. But it was a good time. Let me go back there. So this probably looks really successful so far, and I had a good time as an undergrad. And I did a lot of research. I had a lot of research opportunities. I was lucky to have such positive research experiences as an undergrad, but I was not a stellar academic student. And I actually brought you my 1995 very first ever freshman physics midterm in college, right? And I was inspired to bring this in by Professor Eileen Pollock, who will be speaking to you later today, who had a similar low-grade first midterm experience. And I know you can't see it, but I got a 32. There were five problems, each worth 20 points. On the first one, I got 2 points. On the second one, there was something that my professor whited out, and then he wrote on top of it a 0. He decided whatever he thought I'd gotten points for, he changed his mind. And then problem number 3, I got 20 points. This kind of saved me. I got the full credit. Problem 4, I got 5 points, and problem 5, I got 5 points to get my 32. But this was actually a really awesome professor. I stuck it out in the course. I worked my butt off, and I got a B, and I was actually really proud of that B. And it was a really great professor. I actually ended up dedicating my PhD thesis 10 years later to my freshman physics professor. So, but yeah, I was kind of a B student, B plus student in my physics and math classes. I was double majoring in music. Actually, I completed a double major in music. That kind of brought up my GPA. But yeah, so research was going really well. And then after I graduated, I applied to and gotten into a PhD program in physics, and I started working for a research group from that institution the summer before I started. And actually, it came down to 2 different graduate schools that I tried to choose between, and the way it finally felt was that one of them offered my then boyfriend, he is now my husband, a job. Yeah, we've been together 17 years now. So they offered him a job, and so actually at that university, he's a software engineer, and he's done a lot of software for the different physics communities. So it was the physics department there that actually offered him a temporary contract. But so we ended up going there. And again, it was a group doing physics at CERN. So it really looked like this ideal setup that we found for ourselves, where all his family was still back in Italy, and we could go back and forth. He had employment at my university. And so when I was taking classes, we'd both be at the university. When I was doing full-time research, we could both move over to Geneva, not too far from where his family was. This was the summer before graduate school. And then I ended up leaving. So I ended up leaving that program. So the immediate cause, it was the second semester, my first year there. The immediate cause were some health problems, but I'd actually been really unhappy there. So I was actually treated very badly, in particular by 2 faculty members and one staff member. It was not my research advisor, actually. And I honestly don't think it was gender related either. So I ended up taking a leave of absence, and then I got pretty lost for a while. I didn't really know what to do. I ended up going to, so it was easier at that point for me to get a work visa in Italy than for my husband, my then boyfriend. You don't have any legal relationship without when you're not married, right? So it's easier for me to get a work visa in Italy than for my boyfriend to start over a visa process with some other company or institution in the US. So I ended up moving to Italy with him without too much of a plan. I ended up teaching English and music privately with a private school, teaching English as a second language to mostly children, some adults there, which was a pretty neat experience, but it was a really difficult time in my life because I'd gotten off my track, and I didn't really completely understand what had happened, I guess. So one of the craziest things, I guess, about that summer doing research before, so it was a postdoc supervising me directly, and I was remote from the faculty member who was back at the university in the US, and the postdoc officially responsible for supervising me, he told me explicitly when I started that I was forbidden from asking any questions. And when I look back now, it seems outrageous to me that I should have somehow accepted that. But he was dead serious. So if I tried to ask him questions, he would tell me that I should go stare at it longer. That was also his word, stare. And at one point, he had a few basically insults, right? He would, I remember one of the things he would say is, what do you think this is, undergrad? And he would answer the question. And then he'd ask if I wanted to be spoon-fed. And there were other members of the group, of course, who were out there stationed at CERN, other more senior grad students and one junior postdoc right there, and they were all fine, but none of them stood up and said, that's nonsense, right? Which is really what I needed. So I just sort of thought that I'd come in with the wrong expectations, that, oh, I'm doing a PhD now. A PhD means you're doing independent work. So from the first week, you're just independent. And somebody hands you a project and walks away, and you're not allowed to ask any questions. But of course, I didn't make much progress at all. And yeah, it was a really awful summer. It was a really, really awful summer. And then having 2 faculty members when I came in the fall also kind of use my financial support. One of them actually completely fabricated departmental rules to try to get me to do something that he needed somebody to do. And it just came out a little bit later that those weren't actually departmental rules, but he just made them up for his convenience to try to get me to do something that he needed done. So it really messed with my head. So it might sound like my grand adventures off in Europe for a year and a half teaching English and music, and in retrospect, there are a lot of things, valuable things that I got from that experience, and I certainly am grateful to have gotten to know my husband's family so much better. I know my husband's language much better than if I hadn't actually spent time there. So it had its benefits, but it was a very big psychological cost at the time. So I knew after my interlude teaching English and music in Italy for a year and a half that I wanted to come back to physics, but I didn't want to go back to the institution I'd been at, and I'd missed the deadline for transferring, so I just looked for a temporary job. I ended up getting a 12-month contract back at Brookhaven National Lab. And from there, I reapplied to graduate programs from scratch and went on to my postdoc. So my career in 1996 to 2012 in fiction, where I started at this low energy nuclear structure lab, did a summer at BNL after my sophomore year, spent the summer at CERN, worked at Daisy in Germany, I wasn't stationed there, and then went back to CERN as an incoming graduate student, had my interlude teaching English and music in Italy, and then ended up back at BNL. And that 12-month temporary contract at BNL actually generated the initial conditions that set much of my course for the next 11 years, how it ended up working out. So I sat in that same hallway in the BNL physics department for those 11 years, supported in turn by 4 different institutions. And the main thing, I wanted to give geographical stability to my husband by this point, and then actually my children once they were in the picture. So I actually turned down a couple of career opportunities, 2 tenure-track faculty positions, to staying in temporary contracts, which was really nerve-wracking at the time, but it really just wasn't the right time for it. So I decided I got married in the first half of my 20s. I decided that I wanted to start a family. When I was a PhD student, I sort of looked around, or looked at other people pursuing careers in physics, or academic careers, which was what I was aiming for at the time. And I thought that when you're a postdoc, you're on this short contract, 2 to 3 years. If you get a faculty job, you tend to be really busy and wearing bad tenure. And so I thought, well, some people take like 5 years, 4.5 years to do a PhD. Some people take 7, 8 years. If I take another 6 months, right, because I have a baby, who's going to be able to say anything to me? So I had my son. I said I wanted to have him the last year of my PhD. And I'm honestly not convinced that I took any longer to finish my PhD having had a kid, because I had told myself that I was having a child the last year of my PhD, and that became the most meaningful deadline in my mind than anything else, rather than, I should finish soon, right? So I defended my thesis the day before his first birthday to make sure that I made this work. It's my parents and my husband here. Then I had my second one when I was a postdoc, a year and a half into my postdoc, and that was a lot more challenging actually, partly because of what was going on, partly with the things that were going on in my job, but I was also getting more invitations to talk at conferences and stuff, but nervous to turn them down because if I turned them down, then I wouldn't be networking with other people or get other invitations in the future. But the second one was the more difficult baby. And then of course we didn't just have a baby, we had a toddler and a baby. They're 2 years, 7 months apart. The solution, it took me a few months to think of, but the solution became to bring her with me. And my son, who's a toddler, stayed home with my husband. So she came to 6 different professional meetings with me before she turned blonde. So here she is at the American Physical Society Division of Nuclear Physics meeting in Newport News, Virginia in 2007. So that was a really, really exhausting year, but we made it work. So, the reason I could stay at VNL for all those years, paid by the different institutions, was that I work on a large collaboration. It's about 500 people from 15 countries and 76 different institutions. I'm right there in the middle. And so a lot of different institutions are involved in this project. And here are my kids. Years ago, in the Phoenix, the name of my experiment, they're wearing hard hats right outside with a picture wall. So maybe I actually missed my true calling as a condensed matter theorist. You can never try everything. I started off in nuclear physics and sort of ended up staying in different areas, nuclear particle physics, or even as a park ranger. I actually got a summer job offer from the National Park Service just a couple weeks after I accepted my very first research job, which could have set me, the initial conditions set me on a completely different career path. But among the areas I have explored, I've found a passion in one of them. And I've also found a community of people that I respect and enjoy, where I feel that I've had room for me to make meaningful contributions in different ways. So what I study is the strong force and the structure of the proton. So just a couple minutes of physics here. Probing inside atoms are mostly empty space. So Rutherford did a famous experiment with his group in 1911, scattering alpha particles from radioactive decay off of a thin foil of gold. Both went right through, but about 1 in 8,000 times back. This was the discovery of the nucleus. It's about in orders of magnitude, about 1/10,000th of the size. Then in the 1960s, people had this ability to scatter electrons off of protons at high enough energies to probe inside them, and many bounced back sharply. So they discovered that there were subcomponents inside the proton that we now call quarks. So the strong force is what allows the nucleus to stay together. If you think about it, right, the nucleus of an atom has protons and neutrons. The neutrons are electrically neutral. The protons are all positive. They should repel and make the nucleus disintegrate. So the strong force is much stronger than the electromagnetic force. It's about 100 times and stronger than the electromagnetic force. It's way stronger than gravity, about 10 to the 38 times. But it's a very short range, about 10 to the minus 15 meters. So the strong force acts on particles with something called color charge. Quarks plus gluons themselves. So that's different from the electromagnetic force, where you have charged particles, and then a photon is the carrier of the electromagnetic force, but a photon is electrically neutral. So a photon doesn't interact with another photon like that. So things get more complicated when your carrier particle interacts with itself, which is what makes the field very rich from my perspective. There are a lot of interesting phenomena that we can explore that we're still looking into. It's called color because people realize that there are 3 different charges that you need to combine to make something neutral, and thought of the analogy to red, blue, and green light making white light. And the theory of the strong force is called quantum chromodynamics. But the quarks also carry fractional electric charge, which I still think is kind of cool, actually. So what are known as up quarks carry positive 2/3 of the electron charge. What are known as down quarks carry negative 1/3 of the electron charge. You can never see quarks or gluons in isolation. They're confined to composite objects, which again makes this challenging but a very rich field to work in. So you can have bound states of groups of 3 quarks to make something neutral, where one is red, green, and blue each, or you can have quark-antiquark pairs. So you could get something that's white, color neutral by combining red, anti-red, green, anti-green, or blue, anti-blue. And if you try, you say, well, why can't I pull them out? What happens if I try to pull one out? If you try to pull 2 quarks apart, the energy between them increases until you produce a new quark-antiquark pair. So just think of E equals mc squared. And when you can think of an analogy to a rubber band. So the farther you pull like a rubber band apart, right, the stronger it's trying to pull you back in, right? So you have more energy stored in your rubber band. At some point, it's just going to break into 2 elastic bands. So if we can't see the individual quarks and gluons, how can we determine proton structure? Well, we do inelastic scattering. So we shoot a high energy beam, for example, of electrons at the proton to break it up, and then try to understand what happens. Thinking about probes sensitive to different length scales, well, what size potholes will bother you if you're driving a tank? You need pretty big potholes for them to bother you if you're going around that tank. tank. What you might have to go over in a tank might cause you problems if you're driving a car. Things that might still be okay for your car might be a problem for your jogging stroller, if you see people out with their jogging strollers. And then there's a reason that jogging strollers have bigger wheels than strollers not intended for jogging. So if you're going out jogging, you don't want to pay attention to every little pothole, right? You want to be going faster, moving faster. Or just think of roller skating, right? Roller skating, that's the hole that you would fall into. So if you're studying molecular and atomic structure, then you can use ultraviolet light because of its wavelength of 10 to 100 nanometers, or X-rays, which have shorter wavelengths of 0.01 to 10 nanometers. But if you want to study nuclei and protons, which are 10,000 to 100,000 times smaller than atoms, you need high energy particle accelerators to see inside them. So I have experiments at two different particle accelerators. I still work at the Phoenix experiment at Brookhaven National Laboratory at what's known as the relativistic heavy ion collider. And then I have a second experiment that's not a collider, but it uses a beam. This yellow line here are experimental detectors right there at the end of that yellow line at Fermi National Laboratory outside of Chicago. These are big detectors. This is about 4 stories tall. Here you can see somebody on the scaffolding. This is a picture of a Phoenix detector at Brookhaven National Lab. And the one at Fermi Lab is only about 2 stories tall. Here's when I was working for the Alamos National Lab, building it. So what have we learned from decades of studying the internal structure of the proton? We've found 3 what are known as valence quarks that carry on average most of the proton's momentum. But we have, and their quantum numbers, the proton's quantum numbers. But we have lots of gluons and what are known as C quark-antiquark pairs coming out from quantum mechanical fluctuations in the proton as well. And gluons, in fact, carry about 50% of the total mass of the proton. And you might have heard in the news about the Higgs boson recently discovered in 2012 at the LHC. Despite all the recent excitement about the Higgs boson and how it generates mass, gluons are actually what's responsible for more than 98% of the mass of the visible universe. So all the everyday matter, the mass of atoms. So if I were on an exclusive Higgs diet, I would weigh less than 3 pounds. So the focus of my current research, I focus on spin momentum correlations within the proton. Those of you who've taken quantum mechanics already can think of this as spin-orbit couplings. And the thing I'm most excited about right now is searching for experimental evidence of an exciting recent prediction of color entanglement. So the idea is that the quarks in 2 different protons get entangled with each other as the protons are coming in to collide. So in 2012, to sort of close the loop on my career path, I ended up coming to the University of Michigan. I didn't really see working remotely from my employing institution as a permanent option. So I'd spent 11 years there at sitting in the physics department at Brookhaven National Lab. The last 3.5, I was working first as a fellow and then as a staff scientist for Los Alamos National Laboratory, which is in New Mexico. And I would just spend a few weeks there every year. But this wasn't really what I wanted for the whole career, right? Working remotely from my colleagues or my employing institution. So my husband and I looked pretty carefully at where we would be willing to live, what institutions I would be willing to work at, and then when we decided it was time, the younger one was going to go into kindergarten, the third one was going into 3rd grade. We'd owned a house for 6 years, so we decided we were ready to sell it again. I just saw job opportunities were there, only applied to ones that I really knew if I got them, we would all be willing to go, because we thought we could make our lives work there. And I'm grateful to have landed where I am now. I feel really fortunate to have ended up here, because there are a lot of things that are out of one's control, and you never quite know how it's going to go. So yeah, I'm really grateful to have landed where I am now. Here's my research group, my first year here. We're at Fermi Lab, grad students, postdocs, and 2 undergrads who are working with me at the time. Feeling kind of short in this photo. But I'm really happy to have the opportunities. Coming from a national lab, I'm really happy to have the opportunities to work with young people and to be teaching as well. So just a few concluding remarks. I think it's important to actively think about where you'd like your path to take you, but I think it's important not to be afraid to change directions and not to be too afraid when you have your directions changed by external forces, which can also often be the case when you're en route. And I think you really usually have more options than are immediately obvious to you. So even when I turned down those 2 tenure-track faculty offers in 2007 and 2008, and I didn't come here in 2012, a lot of people told me, you can't do that. That's even usually what they said. That was their phrase, well, you can't do that. It's like, well, I wasn't asking their opinion as I was making a decision. I was telling them after I made a decision, so I'm not quite sure how that would have been even helpful to me. To say you can't do that, but you can do a lot of things. You just need to be more creative, right, about how you're going to make things work, and you need to become more flexible about how you're going to do things, open to different options. And there are many paths, some more linear than others, to success. So when I think of success, I really think about setting up your life as a whole in such a way that you're generally happy with where you are, what you're doing, both personally and whatever you choose to do professionally. And I just like to close with a quote from T.S. Eliot that I resonated with both in my personal and professional life. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Thank you. The gluon interactions, so it's not related to the Higgs field, it's the field, it's the strong force field, if you will. The gluon interactions is that interesting. Good.
Did you experience any discrimination when you decided to become a longer during your postdoc from your peers?
So when I was, the question was, did I experience any discrimination when I decided to have a child? So the people, when I had my first kid when I was a grad student, people were overwhelmingly supportive. So my formal research supervisor for my PhD, he was very supportive, and so it's great. We'll figure out how to work out your schedule. We're flexible. He was very flexible. It was funny though when I would meet with him right after I had the baby, and he would always sit completely orthogonal for me when I was nursing, which was fine. But then the senior professor in my group actually, it was really kind of cute actually. So what he said, "Oh, this will be a first for the Department of Energy group," which was really amusing. But it was actually really touching because it was like he felt some stake in it, actually. Right? But this was like the group's baby. The research group was having a baby. And then he and his wife got me a lot of baby clothes and stuff when the baby came. And then even working, like there are 500 people in my collaboration, and I'd spent 11 years sitting at the main, at the host institution where the facility was, so I knew a lot of people in the collaboration. And it was just over 100 of them who either sent me like a private email or a card or a few of them small gifts or whatever when the baby was born. And then there was one really stark exception. So there was one person who came up to me in my office at BNL, who wasn't a BNL person, but he worked on the experiment, and I came by to congratulate you, but you're making a huge mistake. Right? And he told me that I wouldn't be able to have a career, having a baby as a grad student. And again, if I were soliciting his opinion somehow when I was debating, whether I wanted to start a family, maybe that would have been possibly useful advice. But after the fact, oh, thanks, I'll go take care of this. So it was really that one exception, which was a very stark exception. And if it had been a bunch of people coming up and saying that to me, that would have messed with my mind for sure. But people were really, really supportive. With the second one, it was less. It was just more difficult. I only took like 6 weeks off and had a shorter, postdoc contract, and a lot of pressure on me to be productive in a different and focused in a different way than I had been. I was focused as a grad student, but some of the whole climate was a little different when I was a postdoc. But I don't feel that I've experienced really discrimination from that. Also, when I brought my daughter, my second one, to all these meetings, people were actually quite supportive, which again sort of surprised me. That a lot of people I knew, people I didn't know, came up and they were like, "Hey, it's great great to see a baby here. And then there was one meeting that was difficult where because she changed right every month. And so like that picture there, she was 3 months old, so she was tiny. She didn't want to move around because she couldn't even roll over yet, right? And so she just sat, in the sling with me. And then when I had to give 2 talks at that meeting, and one of my friends/colleagues took the baby for those 2 times 20 minutes, and it was okay. And then I went to a meeting, and there were parallel sessions there too. So then I went to a workshop when she was 5.5 months old. So she liked pushing her. She couldn't walk independently. She liked pushing her stroller. She liked crawling around, and she would verbalize more. She wasn't even crying, but and it was all like plenary. There were no parallel sessions, so I couldn't like be out in the hallway, or people wouldn't think I was in a different session. Yeah, and then she would just verbalize in the back of the room. So I was crying, and then the organizers came up to me in the first 2 hours and they were like, "This isn't gonna work." But then they found a solution, which was a little weird, but they just created a sign-up sheet for people to sign up for half-hour slots to watch her in the hallway. And, it worked. It was a little awkward. I felt a little awkward about it at the time, but in the end, people were supportive. And then it was interesting because some of my friends who were close to my age, who were guys, and you could feel like avoiding eye contact. They're asking you to watch your baby for a half hour. And then you saw there was a whole demographic of older men who wished they had grandchildren, I think. And they were like, "Oh, okay." They signed up very quickly. So it was interesting sociologically, but it was a little awkward. But like I said, we made it work. And we're also taking her to Europe for a meeting in Italy. I try to go to maintain professional connections in Italy for the sake of my keeping closer connections to my husband's culture and background. And yeah, I was so jet lagged already, and I had to talk on the first day, and then the baby kept me up a lot over the night, and I hadn't really slept on the plane. And that's probably the I don't know if it's the worst talk I've given. It's the least present my mind delivering a talk was it when I was one of the times when I brought my baby overseas to Europe, and then couldn't really sleep on the plane, and then I couldn't really sleep the first night I was there, and I had to sleep right away. But we made it through. So.
Yeah, terrific presentation. I just have a question about when you were in grad school the first time and you had the advisor who said no questions,
Yeah,
and the guy who made up rules for you.
Yeah.
You said it wasn't gender related, but do you think that female students are more likely to react to somebody acting that way by leaving the program than a male student?
I definitely internalized a lot of it as I had the wrong conceptions about what graduate school was, and then after I left the program, I had a lot of doubt about whether it was really the institution and the circumstances, the people who weren't right for me, or whether I wasn't cut out to do a PhD in physics. So there was actually some small part of me that didn't 100% believe I was going to graduate until the day I handed in the draft of my thesis to my committee, which is kind of weird if you think about it, because I had already invested so much by that point. But
I think
I think we're running out of time here.
Finish up, sorry, we're a little bit over. But Dr. Aidala will be around all weekend